Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have some questions. I guess I've got some concerns about the limits of liability, and maybe I'm just not understanding the way the bill is written. But on the language that I pulled offline last night as I was reading through it, starts around line 118, goes to line 140. Am I to interpret that we're requiring just minimum limits, the 20-40-10 limits of liability for these?
No, the language that was put in front of you today is the proper language. And no, it would be 50, 100, and 10. And then it goes up depending on the vehicle and how many passengers. What we did was there's a section of statute that has a statutory minimum for taxi cabs and buses. We just essentially mimicked those statutory limits.
Okay. There's some other sections that I have some concern about with respect to how livery is defined on a personal automobile policy, and pretty much most people that are Uber participants, Uber drivers, are going to be individuals using their either personally owned vehicle or a vehicle they're leasing, but so it would be a newer vehicle. And maybe this has been stricken in your change here because we just got this substitute language, but there seems to be two standards that people are being looked at. There's the I've logged into the Uber system and I'm waiting for my phone to beep that I've got a client to pick up, and then there's the I've got a client in my car. So if I'm reading correctly, the first situation where they're just basically driving around waiting for their phone to beep, go pick somebody up, that they're only getting 5,125 limits of liability.
Could you, Representative, could you tell me what section that is? I don't. We did strike section 3 and 4.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm trying to figure out. It's
what
the bill
line?
I printed off last night. It was line 199 to 211.
Yeah, I think that was.
Is that the stricken part?
199. Yes, that was stricken.
So in your substitute language, you're still doing like a 5,100 or a lower limit of liability?
The 5,100. And 10 property, and depending on the vehicle,
so
and how many passengers are in it, it would crank up depending on the type of vehicle.
Okay.
Actually,
so if it was just an SUV that could handle 4 passengers, what limit of liability?
5,100.
5,100.
10 property.
So the way I define livery and the insurance policy, that first situation where they're on the road, they're just waiting for their phone to go off to go pick somebody up, I would argue that the insurance company is going to define that as a livery intent or a livery operation if they're involved in an accident, and they're going to exclude coverage. So by doing a lower limit, especially if you're dealing with somebody who's got a leased vehicle, and the leasing companies all require that you maintain 100, 300, 100 limits of liability, aren't we putting people in violation of their leasing contracts by mandating a lower limit?
I think our thoughts was to leave the businesses alone, let them work it out. The carriers will make sure that they gain their premium. Uber is a very large company. I don't know what the agreement is with Uber and their drivers on coverage, but our thought was to let the market take its shape in terms of premium and policies, rather than us getting too involved in it. And we thought, at a minimum, let's keep it the way what we have in statute already for taxi cabs and buses.
Senator Pasquale. And I have some more questions. Because if you go into that second scenario where they've actually got a customer in their car, and maybe this has been stricken as well, the original bill showed $1 million, or required $1 million. So that's also been stricken. Again, we just got this like 2 minutes ago, so I haven't had a chance to really read into it. But is that the situation?
Yes, that section has been stricken. Yeah,
okay.
I believe it's a several billion-dollar a year company. I mean, it doesn't relieve them of their liability. If,
Yeah, but if the law only says that they have to carry 5,100, why should they carry $1 more?
why should they? Well, they're still exposed. They have billions of dollars in assets. They're going to have to entertain any kind of a liability claim against them. So I think the statutory minimum really, I just think the nature of the business. We also thought about dispatch companies or taxi cab companies and so on and so forth. There's nothing that requires them to have $1 million liability above and beyond the 5,100 that's in statute. But it doesn't relieve them of their liability in the absence of insurance.
Well, I just think about the fact that you're taxi cab drivers are employees of a company, and the responsibility follows ownership of the vehicle. So if I'm working for John's Taxi Service and cause a bad accident, the taxi service is going to be dealing with the liability issue, and I would just walk away from the claim. But as an Uber driver, I'm John Scott. I own the car. Responsibility follows ownership of the vehicle. So while I'm Ubering, if I cause a bad accident, it's my liability. But my primary carrier is going to decline it because I was in a livery situation. So I guess I would feel more comfortable if we were to dictate a certain higher minimum limit of liability for this company, so that they don't at some point decide only to give him 5,100. Because I personally have 250, 500, and $1 million umbrella over that. I would expect at least that from somebody that I was working with if that was something I chose to do.
I would imagine, people and businesses pick limits of liability that fit their budget, the nature of their business, their revenues, their wealth. And our thought was to just leave that alone. Let those individuals and those businesses determine the best way to deal with that exposure. And keeping in mind the statutory minimum for the taxi cabs and buses.
Okay. I don't want to hog the whole time, but I do have a couple of other questions. Further on in the bill, in line 292 and going forward, it seems to address taxi cabs and their ability to expand their business. And one of the things that I've actually put in other legislation that didn't get very far this year regarding this subject, but the public necessity, especially in line 296, and the public hearing process. Essentially, what I've seen examples, especially with livery, is if somebody wants to open up a new livery company in southeastern Connecticut, they have to put in an application process, and there's a public hearing. And at that public hearing, the competitors come in and say, there isn't a public need. And then the state of Connecticut says you can't have the livery license because there isn't a public need. Well, you know what? There's probably not a public need for another grocery store or a bakery or a bank, but there's nothing to stop any of those entities from opening up. So why should the state be in the business of saying that competition can't happen? And I would love to see that pulled out of there.
That's existing language. I totally agree with you. I worked with a constituent that wanted to get a medallion or whatever you call it, the license.
Right.
And I was blown away on the process. It literally prevented him from going into the business.
Right.
So I totally agree with you. I just think that, this bill came to us
right. I know it came
because
to us late.
of insurance. Right. And it's a House bill, which means we could probably talk to the House chair and maybe do that after it comes out of our committee. But I just think it would be kind of premature for us to just strike that section or something at this point.
All right.
But I totally agree with you on that. It's seems kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I would love to see that language.
And here you have these transportation network companies, scoffing up the business on them.
Well, I think it would open up their ability to compete.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay.